Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
Shane Foster gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck as he pulled off a lonely stretch of highway into an overgrown parking lot. The headlights illuminated row after row of faded lines painted on crumbling asphalt. Weeds poked through the cracks, and a rusting sign leaned precariously, the neon tubing long dead. If you squinted, you could just make out its peeling letters. Jugs. This was once a lively restaurant, a place Shane had loved as a young adult whenever he had the time and spare cash. Now it was nothing but a boarded-up reminder of better days. He idled the truck, gazing at the looming silhouette of the old building. The moonlight was bright enough to let him see details in the battered facade, from the peeling paint to the warped boards over the windows. Jugs had been a vibrant location for big burgers, ice-cold beer, and a flirty atmosphere. He had come here regularly from the time he was just old enough to slip in unnoticed up until his late 20s. Now he was 47, divorced, and feeling the sting of lost youth. Word on his social media feed said the place had closed for good a couple of years ago. Unable to stifle his urge to revisit that part of his life, he'd driven hours from his small apartment in another state just to stand outside its husk. He clicked off the engine, plunging the interior of his truck into silence. Anticipation, tinged with dread, swirled in his chest as he grabbed his flashlight. He wasn't exactly sure what he'd find inside, or if he'd even be able to get in without alerting the authorities. Yet something stronger than logic told him he needed to see this place one last time, to feel the worn linoleum under his feet, to stand at the same bar where he once ordered burgers and beer, and to maybe reclaim a small part of his younger years. He pushed the driver's door open and stepped into the night, gravel crunching beneath his boots. The wind ruffled his salt and pepper hair as he skirted the building's perimeter. Half of him expected to find a no trespassing sign or discover the place wholly sealed up, but he'd come prepared to pry a few boards loose if needed. After all, it was unlikely anyone cared enough anymore to monitor a dead restaurant. He carried a small crowbar in the side pocket of his jacket, feeling a touch of guilt for planning to break in. Crouching beside a low window, he tested the boards. They were damp and practically rotted through, showing years of neglect. He forced the crowbar's tip behind one plank and gave a solid tug, and the wood shrieked in protest before snapping away from the frame. Splinters cracked under his gloved hand. He paused, glancing left and right, but the night stayed silent and empty. Another tug, another board gave. In less than a minute, he'd made a hole wide enough to crawl through. "Just gotta remove a couple boards and we're in," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his grip. Another jolt, and the last plank gave way. He cleared it aside. "And we're in. That was easier than I thought." He squeezed through the opening, landing inside on a dusty floor. The beams of moonlight shining through the cracks in the boards lit the silhouettes of overturned chairs and empty tables. He waited, breath shallow, heart pounding, wondering if an alarm or local cops might show up at any second. But the hush remained unbroken, and there were no sirens. He flicked on his headlamp, guiding a bright beam of light around the dark space. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed for the first time in a long while. Just stepping inside stirred his memories. Back then, the place had been anything but quiet. Sports games played on multiple TVs. The sizzle of a busy grill permeated the air, servers joked with customers, and the clink of pint glasses mixed with cheers and music. Shane traced his steps to a nearby table, the headlamp illuminating a thick layer of dust. He ran a fingertip across its surface, leaving a line in the grime. "Man," he whispered, letting out a short chuckle. I used to sit right here and dig into a burger the size of my head. He placed a careful hand on the old metal chair, recalling how, on his 18th birthday, he'd come in with some friends who had teased him for always looking starry-eyed at the waitresses in their matching Daisy Dukes and tied flannel shirts. He'd been a scrawny kid with more dreams than sense. That memory tasted bittersweet on his tongue. A wave of longing coursed through him, blending regret with a curious sort of comfort. He directed the beam towards the bar, noticing the row of dusty beer taps stretching across it. His mind flashed to the day he turned 21. He'd made a big show of ordering his first legal pitcher of beer, his friends patting him on the back while the bartender, a woman about his age, just laughed and rolled her eyes in good humor. "Those were some good times," he murmured, stepping behind the bar. He ghosted a hand across the taps, which were caked with dust and corrosion. Such a pity this place had to close. He wondered what life would have been like if he had never moved away, never left this town and the carefree routines that had once felt like home. He blinked away that thought and pointed his headlamp down a narrow hall leading to the kitchen. The beam bounced off stainless steel surfaces that looked dull under all the dust. Still, it was obvious the place had been stripped of anything valuable and cleaned somewhat before being abandoned. As he ventured deeper, his boot bumped into a metal mixing bowl that spun off into the darkness, clanging loudly against a far wall. Shane's heart galloped in his chest. The noise shattered the stillness like a gunshot, and he froze. Every nerve in his body waited for the echo of sirens or something that would signal trouble. Nothing. Silence prevailed again. Letting out a tense breath, he moved forward cautiously, scanning the floor so he wouldn't knock anything else over. He soon came across a rear hallway lined with several doors. The nearest on the right revealed an ancient whiteboard with ghostly traces of writing. Shift board. Days of the week were scribbled across the top, and a list of names was scrawled down one side. A faint smile crossed his face. He recognized a few from many years past, though some of the letters had faded. Remembering his own silly sense of humor, he decided to do something impulsive. He reached out with a dusty fingertip and scratched new letters in the board. "Shelby," he wrote, finishing with a heart over the I. He snickered at how corny it felt, but then he shrugged. "Why not? It's not like anyone will ever see it." He cleared his throat and tried a light, playful voice. "Welcome, Shelby. It's your first day at Jugs," he joked, before returning to his normal tone. "I might be losing it." He turned from the board to a door whose handle hung loose. The door was cracked open, giving him a glimpse of battered old lockers and a bench. Probably a changing room, he guessed. Maybe he'd find a forgotten t-shirt or some leftover uniform. Nostalgia swept through him. He had distinct memories of hearing the laughter of staff from behind these doors, especially when they slipped in and out for breaks. Pushing the door open, he stepped over the threshold. The moment his boot landed inside, something unexplainable happened. The darkness melted away, replaced by the glare of bright fluorescent lighting. Shane squinted at the sudden onslaught of brightness. He whipped his head around to see that the once dusty, broken lockers appeared vibrant and freshly painted. The walls were bright with color, free from any sign of neglect. It was as if he had stepped into a completely different era of the building, as if the place was brand new. He took a quick step back, but the door was gone. Where the battered door used to be, now there was just a continuous wall. He felt a surge of panic, his ears ringing. There was a full-length mirror in the corner, and he stumbled toward it, partly out of alarm and partly to make sure he was still him. But the reflection that greeted him was no longer the middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a scruffy jacket. Instead, staring back was a woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s, slender yet curvy. She had blonde hair that fell around her shoulders, bright blue eyes, and a youthful glow. She wore a dark blue flannel shirt tied off below her chest, revealing just a hint of cleavage. The rest of her outfit was a pair of snug denim shorts, Daisy Dukes really, that showed off smooth legs along with casual sneakers. Somehow, she looked like she was dressed to work at Jugs as a waitress. Shane's mind whirled. "What in the—" he began, his voice trailing off. But the voice that emerged wasn't his familiar gravelly tone. It was higher in pitch, with a warm, feminine lilt. Then another voice came from behind him. "Hey girl, you getting yourself ready? Day one can be nerve-wracking, right?" He whirled around to find a coworker, a woman with red hair and a tidy ponytail, dressed in a similar uniform, a green flannel tied in the same style, denim shorts, and bright sneakers. She had a name tag pinned to her flannel that read, Ashley. Shane stared, heart pounding, but instead of blurting out who he really was, some part of him responded automatically. "Yes, I'm so excited." The words tumbled out without his permission, dripping with a kind of cheerful exuberance. Ashley grinned wide. "You look amazing in that top, Shelby. Can't wait to see you in action." Then she was off, waltzing out of the changing room with a casual wave. "Don't worry, I'll be right there to help if you get swamped." Left alone, Shane, now apparently Shelby, stared at the mirror in shock. He was fully aware of who he was inside, but his body and voice seemed synced to this new identity. The room around him pulsed with life. He felt the faint rush of adrenaline you might get before starting a shift. The idea was surreal, but a powerful swirl of curiosity and the strange sense that he couldn't do anything else pushed him to follow Ashley through the door. He entered the main dining area, and there it was in its heyday. Bright music from overhead speakers, the chatter of customers, the inviting smell of burgers grilling. Sunlight poured in through clean windows, quite the opposite of the boarded-up gloom from moments ago. The big bar at the far end was staffed by a cheerful bartender filling mugs with golden beer foam. A line of waitresses hustled from table to table, each sporting the signature uniform with a flannel crop top and short shorts. In the middle of the hustle, a tall woman with pinned-up black hair signaled to Shelby. Her name tag read, Veronica, Manager. She exuded confidence. "Shelby," she called, flipping through a small notepad. "Your first table is ready. I'll have Ashley shadow you for a bit until you're comfortable. Just be yourself." Shane's heart hammered, but again, the cheerful female voice flowed from his lips. "Sounds good, Veronica. I'm ready." Before he could think of an excuse or step away, a group of 3 customers strolled in, taking seats at a booth by the windows. Ashley nudged Shelby forward. "Go on, you got this. Just greet them, introduce yourself, and get their drink orders." His body moved automatically, guided by memory that shouldn't have existed. Approaching the table with a playful grin, he heard that same lithe voice. "Hi there, welcome to Jugs. My name's Shelby. Can I start you all off with something to drink?" The customers, 2 men and a woman, smiled and glanced at the menus. One man spoke up. "Hey, Shelby, I'll take a Coke." The other man asked for a light beer, and the woman wanted iced tea. He nodded, scribbling onto the notepad that had appeared in his hand. It felt disturbingly natural. "Great choices," he chirped, feeling a little jolt in his stomach as he realized how easily he was settling into the role. "Perfect job," Ashley whispered as they walked away from the table. "Next, we take these to the bar. It's not as busy right now, so you'll have some time to practice entering orders into the system." She gave Shelby a friendly bump with her shoulder. "It's not so hard, right?" Shane, still reeling inside, just nodded. There was an unreal sense of familiarity. The environment dazzled him with its color and motion. After placing the drink orders, the next step was to see if they wanted appetizers. He found himself gracefully navigating around tables, balancing trays of drinks, and even joking with a few customers. His mind was alert, constantly comparing these tasks to the memory of the Jugs he knew as a patron. Now he was on the other side, stepping into the life of a waitress named Shelby. As time went on, he moved from table to table, each new group of customers greeted with a perky smile. It was bizarre, like his mind was along for the ride while his body and voice belonged to Shelby. He felt eyes on him, just as men once glanced at the waitresses in the old days. He'd been on that side of the table, ogling and joking with friends. But now he had a distinct perspective shift. He felt that curious mix of pride in looking good, and also a subtle awareness of being on display. There was no sense of fear, just a fluttering in his stomach whenever he noticed appreciative stares, something he never thought he would experience in this way. Ashley occasionally dropped by with quick tips. "Hey, if you get a big group of guys, always note if one looks ready to order for everyone. Some like to be the ringleader. Also, pick up on signals for dessert." She grinned. "We do a big chocolate brownie sundae that's always a hit." It felt oddly normal. Even Veronica, who was in the middle of seating a large party, found a moment to pass by and give Shelby a thumbs up. "You're rocking it out there. Don't forget to hydrate." Within an hour, Shane got a real taste of how draining waitressing could be. The place seemed to fill up with more customers as lunch approached. He hustled from table to table, reciting daily specials, recommending beers, and collecting tips. He laughed with some customers who joked around and politely navigated more serious ones who wanted no nonsense. The rhythm set in like a routine, and time began to blur. Between the rushes, he found himself at a small staff station, filling up cups of soda and water while Ashley was at his side. She clinked ice into a glass, then gave Shelby a long look. "You're like picking this up so fast," Ashley said. "Were you a waitress somewhere else before?" He swallowed, feeling an uneasy tingle. He wanted to say no, that he'd never done this, that he had simply walked in from a time warp. But the words in that cheery, youthful voice came out differently. "I guess I've just always loved the energy of this place. I used to come around as a customer." Ashley raised an eyebrow. "Most of us did, one way or another," she said, tossing him a friendly smirk. "Anyway, you've got potential. And Veronica rarely says that about new hires." She gave Shelby a gentle pat on the back. "Keep it up." His mind roiled with questions. Where exactly was he? It felt like an alternate version of the past, though the exact year was unclear. He recognized certain servers he recalled from long ago, but a few he didn't. The music playing from the overhead speakers sounded fresh, not dated, and he couldn't exactly slip out the front door in the middle of a shift. Something about this place felt sealed, like he was fated to see it through. He couldn't resist scanning every nook and cranny, trying to figure out if there was a hidden door or a faint crack in reality that would take him back to the present. But each time he thought about it, another table of customers beckoned, or Veronica's voice snapped him to attention, or Ashley dashed over with a new bit of advice. The cycle continued until he accepted, for now, that he was Shelby the waitress. Hours swept by, bringing him to what felt like mid-afternoon. The lunch crowd was thinning, though a few loyal patrons remained, nursing beers or lingering over dessert. Veronica took the opportunity to gather everyone by the bar for a quick meeting. Shane folded his arms, noticing the other waitresses lined up, each looking a bit tired but still in decent spirits. "Great job today," Veronica began, resting her hands on her hips. "We had a bigger lunch rush than usual, especially for a weekday. Shelby, you kept right up." She nodded toward Shelby with a proud smile. "You get the gold star for new hires. Now the dinner rush will start in a couple of hours, so anyone who needs a break, take it now. The rest of you can help straighten up, restock the sauce station, and get ready. Got it?" The group broke with a chorus of "Yes, Veronica," and dispersed. Shane glanced around, wanting to drift off somewhere alone. But as he made a move toward the changing room, Ashley caught him by the elbow. "You want to head outside for some air?" she asked. "I usually go to the small staff area out back. We can sit for a sec." He wanted to refuse, but something made him nod in agreement. They slipped through the side door, and instead of a dilapidated alley lined with trash, he found a clean backlot. A tall fence enclosed a small break area with chairs and an umbrella. Ashley plopped down, letting out a sigh, then pulled a scrunchie off her wrist and retied her ponytail. "Feels good to get outside after a rush," she said. "Sometimes you need to breathe." He nodded, still feeling that odd swirl of conflicting identity. "Yeah, it's been really intense in there." She studied him carefully. "You know, you remind me of someone. I can't place it. Maybe a regular we had once. I don't know. But you've got a familiarity." A jolt of panic streaked through him. "I do? That's interesting." Ashley shrugged. "It's probably nothing. Or maybe you just have one of those faces." Then her expression softened. "So, what brought you to Jugs anyway?" He tried to dodge the question. "I always liked the vibe of the place," he answered, which wasn't a lie. "It just felt like the right time to come in." She nodded in understanding, then checked her phone, muttered something about a friend texting her, and changed the subject. Shane's gaze wandered to the far fence line. Over the wooden boards, he spotted rooftops of neighboring buildings, but they looked fresh, not run down. It made him wonder again if he had fallen into some alternate timeline. Soon, Veronica's voice boomed from the back door. "I need everyone's help inside. Deliveries just came for produce." That cut the break short. Shane and Ashley sprang up, returning to the kitchen. He felt an undercurrent of strange excitement, as though he were part of a team again. Without thinking, he joined the others in carrying boxes of lettuce, tomatoes, onions, and other supplies. The commotion in the kitchen had a lively hum. Cooks in white aprons bustled around, seasoning ground beef or stirring large pans. Nobody seemed surprised to see Shelby navigating around the industrial fridges and stoves. Eventually, the afternoon slipped toward evening. The dinner crowd trickled in with families, couples, and a few singles grabbing a seat at the bar. Orders flew out. Shane, still in the guise of Shelby, carried tray after tray, weaving between tables. It felt surreal. The illusions of sizzling burgers and chatter blended with his own memories of how the restaurant had been. Or perhaps this was how it had always looked in its prime. Part of him was enthralled by the entire experience, while another part kept asking, "How is this real?" Amid this whirlwind, he found himself at a table with a family of 4, parents and 2 older teenage kids. As he dropped off their drinks, one of the teenagers asked, "How long has Jugs been open here? My dad says he used to come here when he was younger." Shane froze, feeling an uncanny twist, but the same cheerful tone left his mouth. "It's been around for quite a while. This place has plenty of history." He left it at that, flashing a polite smile and pivoting away. Occasionally his eyes swept the front windows, expecting them to be darkened and boarded up. But each glance revealed a street outside teeming with life. There was an electronics store across the street that glowed with bright signage, a few people waiting at a nearby bus stop. Cars rumbled past with headlights shining as dusk settled in. He couldn't deny that part of him was enjoying being Shelby. It was as if he had a second chance to feel youthful, energetic, and approachable in a way he hadn't felt in years. No one looked at him as a tired man in his 40s. They saw a friendly waitress with a confident smile, and that gave him a spark he could hardly put into words. The shift finally slowed down late in the evening. Most customers paid up and left, leaving behind half-empty glasses and trays of French fries. Some staff started wiping tables and flipping chairs to sweep the floors. Shane found himself behind the bar helping with inventory, counting bottles. When he finished, Veronica assembled everyone for a short debrief near the center of the dining area. "Great job tonight, folks," she said, crossing her arms with an air of pride. "Sales were up from last week, and the tips look good. Remember, we're open for lunch tomorrow, so get your rest." Then she turned specifically to Shelby. "You did well, especially for your first day. I'm impressed. Keep that energy up, and you'll fit right in here." Shane nodded, feeling a flush of gratitude. The employees then began clocking out in small groups, with a few lingering to finish tasks. He trailed behind Ashley, following her into the changing room he'd first appeared in. The second he walked in, he half expected the illusion to disappear, returning him to the dilapidated ruin. But it still glowed with bright overhead lights, the lockers neatly labeled, and a slight hum from the vents overhead. Ashley opened her locker and rummaged for her street clothes. "Don't forget to fill out the tip sheet," she said. "You leave it with Veronica or slip it under her office door. Then just change and head on out, unless you're planning to stay behind. Sometimes a few folks hang at the bar after closing, but we're not officially open to serve drinks." He nodded, hardly focusing on her words, because his eyes strayed to the full-length mirror. He still saw that woman's reflection. The slender body, the flannel top, the toned legs. A swirl of emotion churned in his gut. It felt disorienting, but also strangely captivating. Yet the thought of staying here all night unnerved him. He needed to see if he could leave, if that would bring him back to reality. "Yeah, I'll just change," he said, eyeing the uniform uncertainly. "But I'm not sure what I brought to wear." Ashley tilted her head. "You're wearing the new uniform for the waitstaff, right? Didn't you bring your usual stuff? Or do you just wear the uniform home?" He panicked, fumbling for a response. A bizarre sense of muscle memory kicked in, and he found himself spinning the dial on a locker that bore the name Shelby. Inside, sure enough, was a small bag with casual clothes, a tank top, jeans, and a hoodie. He grabbed them, his mind racing over how such personal items could appear out of nowhere. Ashley seemed not to notice the perplexity on his face. "No worries," she said, shutting her locker with a clang. "We'll see you tomorrow, bright and early. Good job, Shelby." She paused, giving him a small smile. "Really, you're a natural. I have a feeling you're going to like it here." With that, she slung her purse over her shoulder and walked out, leaving Shane alone. He looked around, then carefully slipped into one of the curtained changing areas. He peeled off the uniform, flannel top, short shorts, and stood there, taking a moment to stare at the unfamiliar reflection of a young woman's body. In the quiet, he closed his eyes, heart pounding. Then he slipped on the casual clothes from the locker. Once dressed, he emerged from the curtain, stuffed the uniform in a neat bundle into the locker, and shut it. As soon as the locker door clicked, the overhead lights flickered. A sudden wave of dizziness rolled over him. He stumbled, bracing himself on the bench. The bright, spotless tiles under his feet dimmed, replaced by the cracked, peeling floor he'd first seen. When he looked around, the changing room was back to its abandoned state. Lockers covered in dust, rusted hinges, a flicker from a dying fluorescent tube on the ceiling. The hum of the ventilation was gone. It felt cold and musty, and his breath echoed in the stillness. He whipped around and spotted the full-length mirror in the corner, chipped and fogged with grime. But in it, he saw his own reflection again, the reflection of a tired man in his late 40s, wearing a tattered hoodie and old jeans. He patted his face, feeling stubble on his jaw. It was as though the entire day had dissolved in an instant. Confusion spiked in him. Slowly, he approached the mirror and stared at the reflection, half expecting Shelby's face to reappear. But it was just him, Shane Foster, gray creeping at his temples, lines around his eyes from years of wear. He let out a shaky breath, turning on his headlamp to confirm the changing room was indeed in ruins. He saw broken lockers, scattered trash. It was as if the place had never been occupied that day. Trembling, he fumbled for the main door. The corridor beyond lay in shadows, with only the faint moonlight seeping in from the cracks. He forced one step after another, mind reeling, until he made it back to the kitchen, then out to the dining area. The tables and chairs were coated in dust once more. No sign of fresh footprints, no music, no chatter. It was the same cold, abandoned building he'd entered earlier that night. A tidal wave of questions threatened to overwhelm him. He had spent hours in that other reality, had a complete shift, interactions, an entire day of work. Yet here he was, in the same night. Only an hour or two had passed, if that. Finally, he made his way to the opening in the boarded window and squeezed out into the night. The parking lot was still deserted, and the same scattered clouds drifted in front of the moon. He reached his truck, yanked open the driver's door, and sank into the seat, nearly dropping the flashlight. Hands shaking, he started the engine. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, headlights illuminating the cracked asphalt, letting the heat warm him while he tried to piece together the bizarre experience. He ran his fingers through his hair. In his mind, he could still recall how it felt to stand in that place as Shelby. The smells, the conversations, the hustle of waiting tables. It was too vivid to be just imagination. Eventually, he realized he needed to leave before someone spotted his truck. He shifted into gear and pulled onto the empty road. The drive back to his motel was a blur of headlights and darkness. The next morning, he woke up in a tangle of sheets, wondering if it had all been some dream conjured by nostalgia. Yet the soreness in his legs from hours of waiting tables felt real enough. He tried to go about his day, got some coffee, took a walk through the quiet downtown of this Midwestern town. But Jugs lingered in his mind. He felt drawn back. By late afternoon, he found himself driving the same route to that abandoned parking lot. The building stood as forlorn and boarded as ever under the waning sunlight. This time he approached more slowly, searching for an explanation. Maybe if he stepped inside during daylight, it would remain ordinary. He figured the night before had to be a trick of his tired mind, some kind of waking dream. But he found the same side entrance, parted the loose boards, and slipped into the darkness. The interior was thick with stale air. Afternoon light slid in through cracks in the boards, illuminating old chairs and dusty counters. He stepped carefully across the debris, pointedly avoiding the metal bowl he'd knocked over the night prior. He made his way toward the changing room again, half expecting nothing to happen. And at first, nothing did. He nudged open the door, shining his flashlight inside. It looked the same as the rest of the building, ruined, deserted. But something tugged at him. He recalled exactly where he had seen that full-length mirror in his dreamlike experience. Slowly, he directed the flashlight to the far corner. The mirror stood, fractured at the edges, the reflective surface coated in dirt. Yet as he neared it, he felt an inexplicable urge to touch it. He lifted a hand to wipe some grime away. For an instant, the reflection in the cleaned patch was that of Shelby, the waitress, wearing that flannel uniform, a flicker so brief he almost doubted his own eyes. He jerked backward, heart pounding. The building stayed quiet and dark, no magical shift this time. He stayed there for nearly an hour, pacing, shining the flashlight, even tapping on the lockers. He felt crazy, calling out quietly in the empty space. "Ashley? Veronica? Anyone?" But no answer came, just hollow echoes. Eventually he gave up, feeling foolish, and left. Yet that night, lying in the motel bed, he couldn't rest. He kept seeing glimpses of that day behind his eyelids. The grin Ashley gave him, the warmth in Veronica's eyes when she praised his work, the swirl of customers' voices. And though he felt ridiculous, he wanted to experience it again. He wanted to slip back into that life, if only for another day. The next evening, he returned once more, this time around the same hour as his original visit. The wind was biting, but a thrill of anticipation kept him going. He ducked through the boards and navigated to the back hallway. On impulse, he revisited the shift board. His finger hovered over the dusty surface where he had once written Shelby's name. He carefully traced over the letters, almost like he was reaffirming them. "Shelby," he whispered. "You still in there somewhere?" Then he turned to the changing room door. His heart was hammering, but his curiosity burned brighter. He eased the door open. Darkness greeted him, the same old dust and debris. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. At first, nothing. The darkness stayed. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of fluorescent light. He pivoted, and the flicker grew. The once silent ventilation system started humming. This time he steadied himself, not letting fear knock him off balance. The bright glare of the lights returned in full, revealing a bustling changing room, the lockers once more polished and new. And as he turned, he caught his own reflection in that mirror. Shelby's face, dressed again in the same flannel crop top and shorts. He glanced down, and indeed, that was his body. The transformation was smooth, as though stepping through the door had flipped a switch in reality. No one else seemed startled. 2 other waitresses zipped by, chatting about an upcoming event. One waved at him. "We're about to start dinner service, Shelby. You coming?" His mouth opened and that lilting voice came out. "Yeah, absolutely." The statement sent a shiver of excitement through him. The second shift had begun. The next days became a pattern. Shane spent daylight hours in his motel room or strolling around the town. He wrestled with the impossibility of what was happening each night, but he found himself drawn to the old building. Each time he returned after dusk, he could slip through that door and the place would be alive. His identity shifted seamlessly into Shelby, and each time Shelby was embraced by her co-workers, who treated her as if she had always been part of the team. He served countless tables, joked with patrons, joined in the staff's banter, got scolded by Veronica once for mixing up an order, and felt the rush of a busy kitchen all around him. He discovered that Shelby had favorite customers, like a friendly father and son duo who always ordered the biggest burger on the menu, and that she had a locker stocked with a few personal items. Sometimes, after closing, he'd remain to help wipe down tables. He shared laughter with Ashley, who teased him about how quickly he was turning into a star waitress. One evening, after a hectic shift, he found himself sitting at the bar with a couple of the cooks, each sipping a soda. The bar was closed to regular patrons, but the neon sign in the window still glowed. One of the cooks, a tall man in a white apron named Josh, tapped Shelby's glass with his own. "You did good tonight," Josh said. "I know it can be tough dealing with that crowd when the local sports team is in the playoffs." Shelby, Shane, smiled back. "It's a rush. I kind of love it." At that moment he realized he meant it. He truly felt alive, chatting with co-workers, being recognized for good work. It lit a spark in him he hadn't felt since he was young. This place, in this bizarre other world, gave him a sense of belonging. But every time the shift ended, when Shelby changed clothes in that locker room, the flicker of lights returned it all to ruins. Shane would reappear in the dusty, abandoned building, and he'd walk out alone. This routine stretched over what felt like a few weeks, though time grew slippery. He noticed oddities, too. No one in that world seemed to question Shelby's origins. Ashley and Veronica remembered everything from day to day, but Shelby's presence wasn't a mystery. Customers popped in regularly, some faces repeating, some new. The background details always aligned to create a fully immersive environment. One night, a special event was planned, the final shift before Jugs was supposedly shutting down. That alone startled him, because the living version of Jugs he experienced never hinted that it was on the brink of closure. But the day came unexpectedly, announced by Veronica during one of their staff meetings. "All right, everyone," she began, voice heavy. "We got word from corporate that after tonight Jugs is closing this location." She scanned the staff's faces. "But we're going out in style. Expect a big turnout. Lots of regulars are coming to say goodbye. Let's make this last night one to remember." Shane felt his stomach twist. He remembered how the real-world version had closed, leaving the building to rot. So this was it. Maybe a finale to this strange phenomenon. He saw the other staff members react with a mix of sadness and bravado. Ashley's eyes glistened with tears she tried to hide, while Josh the cook let out a weary sigh. Veronica slapped her palm on the bar. "Let's make the best of it. Shelby, you've got the big booth by the window. Those guys specifically asked for you." That last evening turned into a wild celebration. Shane, as Shelby, rushed around taking orders from nostalgic customers who joked, teased, and shook hands with the staff. Some people wore old Jugs memorabilia, t-shirts and caps from past years. The air hummed with camaraderie and a tinge of heartbreak. All the while, a flicker of dread built in Shane's chest. This might be the final time he experienced the place so vividly alive. Ashley found him between tables, pulling him aside. "Hey," she said, trying to smile through damp eyes. "I just wanted to say, I'm glad I got to know you. I'll miss working with you. We had some fun, huh?" Shane swallowed hard. "We did," he replied softly. "You've been a great friend." They shared a quick hug, which felt strangely genuine. Then Ashley was off to greet another table. The night wore on with bursts of laughter, tears, toasts, and eventually, the bittersweet moment of last calls. Veronica took the microphone and gave a short speech to the customers, thanking them for so many years of support. The crowd broke into applause. Some even whistled. By midnight, the doors shut for the last time in that reality. Staff gathered in the dining area for one final meeting. Veronica held back tears as she thanked everyone individually. When she got to Shelby, she paused, looking at him with an expression of genuine admiration. "You brought a spark here," Veronica said. "Even though you joined us late, it felt like you'd always been part of the family." He bit his lip, the swirl of emotion welling up. They ended with a quiet round of clapping, and then the staff trickled into the changing room to retrieve their belongings. Shane followed last, each footstep echoing in the hushed building that still felt so alive. Once inside the changing room, he moved to the locker labeled Shelby, the same one he'd used the entire time. Carefully, he undid the uniform, folded it, and set it on the shelf. He hesitated, brushing his palm across the flannel top. It hit him how much he'd grown to cherish this impossible experience, how stepping into Shelby's shoes had invigorated him in unexpected ways. Feeling his chest tighten, he changed into the casual clothes, closed the locker, and slowly turned to face the mirror for the last time. He expected the lights to flicker and the facade to crumble away, but instead, the reflection remained Shelby's. The overhead lights stayed bright. Then Ashley stepped out of a nearby curtained stall, holding a small gift bag. "Hey," she said softly. "I got this for you. It's not much, just a little keepsake. Don't open it until you get home, okay?" He took the bag, forcing a tremulous smile. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes, and then hugged him again before slipping out through the door. Shane stared at the mirror, waiting for the shift. He felt the pulse of the building around him. Slowly, the fluorescent lights began to dim, as though losing power. A sense of finality hung in the air. One by one, the lights winked out, plunging the space into darkness. Shane's breath caught. When he opened his eyes again, the only light came from his own flashlight. It revealed dusty floors, decaying lockers. He glanced at the mirror, and now it showed only the reflection of Shane, the older man, clutching a small bag in his trembling fingers. The smell of mold and stale air returned, driving home that the lively presence was gone. He made his way out of the building for what he sensed would be the last time. The wind outside had picked up, sweeping across the deserted lot. In the faint moonlight, he locked eyes on his truck and trudged across the cracked pavement. Once inside the driver's seat, he turned on the cabin light, half expecting the bag from Ashley to have vanished. But it was there, tangible in his grip. Hands shaking, he pulled out the object inside, a small silver keychain with the Jugs logo engraved, and a note scrawled on a folded piece of paper. "Remember that you were always one of us. Ashley." His breath caught. He tucked it away in his jacket pocket, not entirely sure what to think. A swirl of emotions pressed on him. Part of him wanted to cry but couldn't. He felt some intangible sense of having said goodbye, not just to the restaurant, but also to a piece of his past that he'd never gotten to fully revisit in real life. He drove away that night and headed back to his motel. The next morning, he tried returning to the building in daylight. In the harsh sun, the structure looked more wrecked than ever, the boards so warped they looked close to collapsing. He peered through a hole into the main dining room where dust and broken furniture remained. He found the side entrance again, but it gave no hint of the world he'd stepped into at night. The shift board was blank, just a few ghostly lines. No name spelled out SHELBI. The changing room was a silent tomb. The mirror was still there, cracked in places, but it wouldn't respond to his touch. He stayed until late afternoon, waiting for any sign, any flicker. It never came. Realizing he couldn't do anything else, he left. As he pulled onto the highway leading out of town, he made one last glance at the battered sign. The last red letters of Jugs hung precariously, ready to fall. This time, he didn't stop. He drove on, carrying that small silver keychain in his pocket. On his way home, miles melted beneath the wheels. He thought about the bizarre episodes he'd lived in that building. Maybe it was all in his mind, some elaborate projection of longing for a youth long gone. Or maybe, for a short while, that place had given him a window into a vibrant life that couldn't exist anywhere else. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Shane reached his apartment complex. He unpacked his overnight bag, hung his coat, and eventually pulled out the keychain Ashley had given him. Even though that version of the restaurant existed only in an impossible reality, the keychain felt real enough to anchor those memories. He set it on his kitchen table and stared at it for a long time, letting the swirl of recollections settle. He lay in bed that night, wide awake, replaying bits of conversation, Veronica's kind words, Ashley's jokes, the bustle of the busy bar. He thought about that final shift, the sense of unity. He remembered standing in front of the mirror, seeing a woman's eyes look back at him, bright and free. The experience might never happen again, but it had changed something in him. He felt different now, not necessarily better or worse, but different. The old regrets that had weighed him down for years felt slightly lighter, as if he had recaptured a missing piece of himself from the past. In the weeks that followed, he settled back into his usual routine, working a modest job, occasionally meeting friends, paying rent. But each time he slid his keys into his pocket, his fingers brushed against that silver Jugs keychain. In those moments, he remembered that improbable series of nights, the sound of Shelby's laughter with Ashley, the sizzle from the grill, and the music floating through the air. And though the building was gone, in some sense, he still carried that place with him. One evening after work, he found himself scrolling through old photo albums on his phone, pictures from decades ago. He paused on a snapshot of himself in his early 20s, taken right outside Jugs. He was wearing a baseball cap and giving a thumbs up, the faint sign of Jugs visible behind him. He couldn't help but smile at the memory of those simpler times. It struck him that the old photo aligned seamlessly with certain details from his nighttime journeys. The interior might have changed a bit over the years, but the spirit of the place remained consistent. He closed the album, setting the phone aside. Then, with a quiet sigh, he picked up the keychain from the coffee table and turned it over in his hand. The Jugs logo glimmered under the lamp, and a faint memory stirred. Ashley handing him that little bag, her eyes tearing up on that final night. He whispered, "Thanks for everything," though there was no one in the room to hear. An uneasy sense of resolution settled in. He was back in the real world for good. The abandoned building on the outskirts of town would probably be demolished one day. But it hadn't been simply a relic of the past. For a moment in time, it had been a doorway into a vivid, living moment that felt too real to be a dream. Now, it was only a memory, a powerful, uncanny memory. He sometimes wondered if anyone else had experienced the same phenomenon. Another random visitor from the future or the past stepping through those battered doors. But he never heard of anyone else mentioning it. The older man realized this secret might remain his alone. That was okay. The feeling it left him with was enough. Months later, while rummaging through old boxes in his attic, he found a battered Jugs t-shirt from decades ago. It was from a promotional night. There was a cartoon pinup on the front. He shook off the dust and held it up, a grin tugging at his mouth. In that grin, he could sense a flicker of that young spirit. Placing it on top of the box, he decided to keep it out rather than hide it away. From that moment forward, whenever he felt that tug of longing for the past, he'd catch a glimpse of the shirt or feel the Jugs keychain in his pocket, and he'd remember Shelby. It was a reminder of a part of himself that had found a different vantage point, even if only briefly. The building was gone, but the memory of those bright, surreal nights never faded. And though the restaurant was shut down in both realities, Shane realized he could still keep alive the sense of wonder he'd felt stepping into that strange world. Maybe it was not the same as living it every day, but that echo in his heart was more than enough to give him a reason to keep going, to keep chasing whatever life had yet to offer. Because in the stillness of each morning, the memory of those last hours at Jugs kept him company, offering an intangible spark of hope for the future.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.